And away we go. It's the DFS Early Bird presented by Awesemo.com. Dan Strafford in the shadows here. Dave Lochran over there. Welcome aboard. If you're on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe. Make sure to leave a comment as well. If you're over on iTunes, subscribe, leave a comment, and we'd love to see you over on YouTube as well. Don't forget, Early Bird is your promo code to get 50% off, half off your first month of Awesemo.com. Dave, how the hell are you doing?
I'm doing well, sir. Doing well. Had a nice weekend. Enjoyed myself. What about you?
Doing well. Busy weekend with the kids. I was explaining to you before we started recording, some Irish step dancing, some birthdays. My oldest, which is insane. I'm 25 years old and I have a 9-year-old. So it's this
25. Yeah, that makes sense.
That makes total sense. I'm 37. I have a 9-year-old and she's awesome. And she is now 9. And it was that awesome day of celebrating her on Sunday. So we're happy to do that. But we are ready for a work week here. And we have a 6-game NBA slate, which is nice. It's a nice, easy lift here on a Monday morning. We don't get many of those, Dave.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So actually not just this, but over the next few weeks, we've got, 6, 7, 8 games every single day. It's a beautiful thing.
And we do have what's intriguing here on a 6-game slate is we have Harden, we have Westbrook, so we have to deal with that. But that's sort of the main draw of the expensive guys. It's Harden and Westbrook, 11-4 and 10-8 respectively. Brad Beal is at 9-7, Paul George at 9-5, Drummond at 9-1. Then you drop to a Kyrie, Donovan Mitchell. So it's not necessarily devoid of talent, but it also is very point guard heavy. Right. So it's going to be an intriguing build and an interesting write-up for you. For those who don't know, listen, these analysts, Dave, Adam, guys from other sites have to write up players at each position. You can't just talk all about point guard. So on a night like tonight, it's going to be very guard-centric, but still need to find players at other positions, small forward, power forward, and center, obviously, to make it work. And that can make it a little bit more difficult, especially as we hit March, a bunch of teams tanking, a bunch of teams with injuries as we roll forward. Any injuries that pique your interest here? I know Rubio has been dealing with some problems. He will not play, as I read now, due to a hip injury. So Ricky Rubio is out for the Utah Jazz. I know Van Vliet is still out for Toronto, which doesn't really influence too much. I believe Kawhi Leonard he was out Sunday. I believe he's back Monday. So any other injuries that you have or rest potential here that you want to share with the audience before we get going?
Yeah, there's not a ton. I mean, Larry Nance is out. Tristan Thompson is also out. Dellavedova is out. Cleveland's down a number of guys. They were ruled out Sunday afternoon, so we had that pretty early. And then the only other one outside of, you mentioned Rubio and Raul Neto both out, Treveon Graham, the only one other than that, and as you mentioned too, Toronto, Lowry and Leonard both probable on the second of a back-to-back, is Jason Tatum with that shoulder soreness. He is questionable to play here. And if Tatum's out, it probably would make a decent difference. Nothing crazy, but they've been on this West Coast road trip facing some pace-up teams and some good, favorable fantasy spots. This would be one against the Clippers for sure.
It's going to be this is a sort of short slate, shorter slate that I think will be a fun one, but we'll dive in here. As always, we give you the early look, the early bird, as we say, but you get the NBA strategy show from Josh and Adam. And I believe Adam is finally back from his escapades out there on the West Coast. Good for him. So it's Adam and Josh first thing Monday morning, usually around 9:15 a.m. East Coast time. You get the deep dive from Dave, which is the write-up behind the paywall. You need to be an Awesemo.com member. And then you get the deeper dive, Adam and Dave at 5 p.m. And then live before lock, Spags or Josh, I should say, with Ed Fear. You may know him as Fast Eddie Fear, maybe, perhaps, if you follow him on Twitter. And then you get them leading up to lock. So you get all that from Awesemo.com. You get the projections, you get the lineup builder, you get ownership projections, all that more for membership only. Again, early bird is your promo code. Dave, let's dive in. We have Westbrook, we have Harden at the top here at point guard. They are 11-4 for Harden, 10-8 respectively for Westbrook. Kyrie is 8-9 against a pretty solid matchup here in LA against the Clippers. Boston trying to right the ship and get things moving in the right direction. Then you have Kemba against Houston. Kyle Lowry is at 7,600, price tag up, I believe, a little bit here over the past game. Yep, 7,100 last time out, and then 7,600 against Miami. So that holding steady there. De'Aaron Fox. I don't know what accent that was. De'Aaron Fox.
De'Aaron Fox.
It's the Boston.
Like
the Boston. It's seeping through, man.
On you.
7,300 here for De'Aaron Fox. Seems like a decent price point with a good matchup. What do you got top end of point guard?
Yeah, by the way, did you see James Harden had 5 fouls to start the third quarter?
I did. Oh, wait, can we quickly, John Collins or Derrick Jones Jr., which was the better alley-oop and dunk?
Dude, all right, so the John Collins, first of all, I am a big fan of John Collins.
Yep.
Okay. This guy has been fantastic when healthy. I think everyone's loved what John Collins has done this year, right? And this alley-oop was no exception.
It's the turn of the hand that really gets me.
Yeah, beautiful. So I have a tough time with this, but I will say this. Here's the difference. John Collins actually got hand on rim.
Mm-hmm.
I still give it to Derrick Jones Jr., though.
Because he threw it into the basket.
Mate, now Collins contorted himself. It was beautiful. But the liftoff on Derrick Jones, number one, the ability that was a bad alley-oop pass. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was
from
was all the way back. It was just absolutely gorgeous. So I go Derrick Jones here.
Both are worth watching. Again and again. I am blanking on who tossed the Miami backup center. Why can't I remember his name?
Who are we talking about?
Who tossed Derrick Jones Jr. the alley-oop?
Backup center. Bam? Are you saying backup center? Bam Adebayo. Okay, yeah.
Adebayo threw it and threw a terrible pass. And Derrick Jones Jr. went up with the left hand. Go watch it. Go watch it on YouTube.
By the way, I'm sweating a Phoenix Suns bet. I took Phoenix to win after the fourth. Straight up. After the third quarter at plus. Okay. They were down by 1.
Yep.
I got them at plus 750 to win. So 100 on plus 750 is pretty nice. They're up by 10 right now with 2.5 minutes left. Now,
and Durant is not coming back.
Durant's not coming back. It is the Warriors. It is the Suns. Now it's an 8-point game. So this could turn sour quickly. But at one point in the fourth quarter, the spread went to 13.5. The Warriors went up by 8, and I'm like, I shouldn't have done. I was just feeling, because here's my thing. This is what I've been doing lately. And look, again, I could still lose this, but just looking at it right now, it was a good bet, because I have reasoning for it. Third quarter Warriors have been fantastic this year, right? Mm-hmm. We know when they and I put 100 on the third quarter for the Warriors. They lost, or they didn't lose. They were minus 5.5. They actually lost the third quarter outright. So if that's the case, then this team, they're not playing well tonight. When they don't come out strong in the third quarter in a close game at the Oracle, it's very hard to buy into it. It looks like they're making a push now, but nevertheless, this is a spot where if it's tied, it's real close going into the fourth quarter. You can tell that the Warriors do not have their best stuff. So that's what I went with. There's a possibility I win. If I do, that'd be pretty cool, because it was such long odds on it. But right now, Warriors making a bit of a push. 1.5 minutes left, so follow along with that one as well. But anyway, point guard, you're right. Guard centric, I agree. Kyrie Irving, man, he got off to a rough start the other day, and I had a decent amount. I thought, this is going to kill me. And then his second half was just monstrous against the Lakers. I like him again against the Clippers. Yeah, he'll see some tough on-ball defense from Pat Beverly, but I'm still not too concerned about that, only because you got a guy in Irving who is going to go out there and see a lot of volume, and he's going to see a lot of minutes as well. So to me, Kyrie Irving is a very strong play here. Russell Westbrook against Utah with Paul George healthy and all that. I don't mind not going to Westbrook here. It's not to say he can't put up big numbers, but I don't think you have to. And I probably won't. Kemba Walker is still discounted, so that's nice to see. Do we love Kemba? Tough to say. I'm not in love with it. He was very chalky against Washington at 8,100, and against Milwaukee he was 8,300. If you're still getting him at this discount, he's fine. He still has a very high ceiling, but I'm not really in love with this, especially when Irving on DraftKings is 8,900. 8,900 for Irving seems really low. Chris Paul is 7,100. I don't hate that either against the Charlotte defense that has struggled. There's plenty to like here. I don't even mind Thomas Satoransky. I think he's fine against the Sacramento Kings. This game should feature a ton of scoring. Right now, we're looking at an over-under of 241.5.
Yes, sir. Yep.
241.5. So, you'd be very surprised if this game is not just back and forth. Sometimes they go way under, but it's tough to see this one happening with these defenses. Sacramento Kings defense has been all right, but Washington, believe it or not, favored by 2 points at home. This game should stay close. It should feature a ton of scoring, and I think that's another reason why De'Aaron Fox makes for a really good play. Haven't played a lot of Fox lately, but this is a Wizards team that on the season allows the most points to opposing point guards. They allow, when it comes to assists, they allow the third most assists. They allow where are we at on rebounds? They allow the third most rebounds, and unsurprisingly, the second most fantasy points. Really good spot for De'Aaron Fox. And now you're getting him at a price point where you really don't have to reach. You're not paying up for him. And he's been back up to playing those huge minutes recently. Fox could be a really, really strong play at 73.
What about Donovan Mitchell here with Ricky Rubio out? You've seen a usage percentage creep up over the last 10 games to 34.1%, well above his season long of 31%. Is this a spot where Mitchell could excel and exceed his price tag, or do you think at 8,400 that's properly priced against Oklahoma City?
Yeah, with Mitchell, it's kind of tough because he's one of those guys that is so scoring dependent. But with Rubio out, I was going to wait till shooting guard. With Rubio out, I don't know how you don't like Donovan Mitchell here. I don't think 8,400 is too much. A massive pace up spot for this Utah team, 228 total. No, you're right. This is, again, we can talk about him here. No big deal. This is a very favorable spot for Donovan Mitchell and for most of this Utah team. But 8,400 is not crazy whatsoever. And I would expect this game to stay very close. I expect to see a lot of scoring. And I think you probably get potentially 38 minutes from Mitchell here, which at that price with his usage and more importantly, the added facilitating duties with Rubio and Neto sideline makes him that much more appealing.
As we touch on shooting guard, we'll bring him back up again. 8,900 over on FanDuel, to Dave's point. Probably more suited for a shooting guard discussion, but we'll hold him there. What about mid or cheap tier? Anybody stand out to you from the ranks of point guards, sub, let's say 7K, Lou Williams and below?
Yeah, we talked about, by the way, Lou Williams was great to us at Awesemo the other day.
He was. If
you watched our show and you paid attention to that, Lou Williams probably did you real solid. So hopefully we all made out well from that. Satoransky definitely in play here. I like him. And I'll tell you what, Dinwiddie has been a guy that with his price point being down as much as it's been, you kind of just had to lock him in. And his ownership hasn't even been that crazy. Been at 53, 5,600. Now he's at 6K. Matchup isn't nearly as good as the one with Cleveland and Atlanta. So, if Dinwiddie continues to go ignored, I think I'll have some interest. But if people start piling on, I don't think they will. But if that's the case, I have no problem getting away from Dinwiddie here, especially given that him and Russell so often move back and forth with sharing the big games. And Dinwiddie's got two of them in a row. That makes it a little bit less appealing. And Detroit's defense really is not that bad. Backcourt defense, they're not special, but they're not pushovers like we've seen from the last two games that he's had. So no, nobody super cheap there, but there are a few that stand out. Satoransky being one of them. Chris Paul 71 isn't too crazy of a price tag. And I guess if you wanted to throw Gilgeous-Alexander in there, he's below 4K now. And I don't hate it. He's just not a great per minute guy, and it's going to be hard to get to him with any confidence.
All right, worthwhile to remember, Dave writes up the deep dive on Monday. If you're not a member of awesemo.com and you want to be, early bird is your promo code, one word, gets you in for 50% off your first month. Let's move to shooting guard, and we'll cover off on anybody we may have missed at the end. But shooting guard, you have Harden, you have Beal here against Sacramento, Donovan Mitchell, who we've talked about a bit of already, and then you have a lot of MPE guys, Hield and Williams, Dinwiddie, Joe Ingles, Satoransky, Batum. It gets... to quote Louis of Oz, it's going to get darker before it gets lighter. It seems as though shooting guard is not as deep a position as we may have hoped. What do you got here at the 2?
All right, so a couple of things. We talked about Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell clearly stands out as one of my favorite plays at the position. And, you asked me, what about price? I don't think that price point's crazy at all, right? If Rubio was active, we could have a
Sure.
deeper discussion. And even if Neto was, because Neto would have ball handling duties. Granted, that's not nearly as impactful as Rubio, but think about how big of a difference is, believe it or not, having Neto off and ONeal being the one to see the bulk of those minutes in the starting lineup. ONeal literally doesn't touch the ball each game unless it smacks him in the face. So, yeah, it's pretty favorable. Jeremy Lamb is still sub 6K. And if we're going to get him at that price point, then I'll probably continue to roster him. He's a tough one. I mean, once in a while he'll have these pretty rough games, but he also has proven, Dan, that his ceiling is not low at all. I mean, he's dropped 50+ fantasy points twice in his last 6. So there's clearly upside when it comes to Jeremy Lamb. And another guy that believe it or not, I've rostered 2 nights in a row, and he has not let me down. You're not going to believe this because I do not like rostering Nicholas Batum. And
you wrote him up the other day. I remember that.
Yeah. And the reason why, I actually had made the argument to play him over Jeremy Lamb because Lamb's popularity was through the roof. Granted, Lamb had a bigger game. Lamb had a really solid game. But then I employed the same strategy the next day, and Batum outproduced him at a cheaper cost. So it's not going to work every time, right? And it didn't. But Batum also didn't kill you. And here's the thing, Dan. Batum over his last 9 games is averaging 39 minutes per game. So even if since the All-Star break or since the deadline, even if he's only averaging 0.81 fantasy points per minute, well, you're getting him at 39 minutes per game. So you don't need a monster performance. You're looking at 32 fantasy points there. He's 5,700 facing Houston. And if Batum's going to play that many minutes, I don't have an issue with him. And quite frankly, I don't see him being that much worse of a play than Jeremy Lamb. Sure, per minute, he's not nearly the same. But Lamb has these games where he'll play 27 minutes. Batum, unless it's a blowout, isn't playing fewer than 37 minutes.
Right.
Sometimes I'm all right taking the minutes there. And, he's the type of guy that can give you a 12-8-7 game with 3 steals and a block, and you're pretty happy with it. And I'm just throwing that out there because the right now Borrego and the Hornets are very much trying to get into the playoffs. And then I'll get your take on this. I'm curious where you stand because we did talk about Mitchell, but Bradley Beal insane. By the way, the Phoenix Suns won by 5. I will take that win, baby. That is nice. That is nice. It got real close for a second there. It looks like they might win by 7. So who was I talking about?
Beal.
Bradley Beal. And like I said, I want to get your take. He's number 1. The minutes. I mean, are you kidding me? 41 minutes and 40 his last game, 45 in overtime. He's producing monster numbers. He's flirting with triple doubles every night. I get that he's expensive, but man, we went from seeing Bradley Beal once John Wall went out right around Christmas as pretty decent. Sure, I'll pay $8,200, and then he gets up and you're like, I can do better for 40 fantasy points at 9K, and now he's just been off the charts good.
My whole thing with Beal is ownership. It really comes down to where I'm getting him from a ownership perspective. 9,700 is a number that gives me pause with Beal, simply because of personal bias against them. But the usage, the minutes, all of it makes sense for a guy who carries this team right now. So if I'm going to get him at a sub 12% ownership on a 6-game slate, I'd be very intrigued. If he's going to be popular here, I'd be off. 9,700, can't imagine he's going to be. Like, Beal seems like that sort of guy in NBA DFS circles who people just shy away from. He's not Harden. He's not Westbrook. He's not that ball-dominant point guard who's going to make such a huge stink about the ball being in his hands. But from a usage perspective, and the big thing for me for NBA, and you have to remember with Beal especially, is you look at his usage numbers, they haven't changed drastically since the start of the season. But Wall's been out for a significant amount of time, like a significant amount of time, where his season-long numbers have righted. They've sort of made to a point where they've made sense again because how much he's been ball dominant. I like him, and I think he may be single-digit owned on a 6-game slate. I think he could be an 8-9% ownership guy here at that price point. I'm willing to take the risk on for a 55 to 65 point DK outing on a night like this. Yeah. So I'm not a huge Beal fan, but I think ownership really factors in here and would be somebody that I would lean on because of lower ownership in a prime spot to put up a gigantic outing.
I'm with you. Ownership definitely plays a role here, especially if you're getting like massive Donovan Mitchell ownership.
Yeah, exactly right.
And it's really hard to believe that Beal's going to be that popular. I totally agree. Now, if you're talking value at the position, there's not a ton here. You know, I like Buddy Hield, by the way, mid-range guy. He's played really well, getting around 34, 35 minutes per game, 7,400, you know, much like De'Aaron Fox. That seems to be that's a little bit too cheap to overlook. And Buddy Hield's actually been more consistent recently, right? You know, you look at him, I'm just looking at his last 10. He hasn't finished with fewer than 30 fantasy points in any of them. He's dropped a 52, a 51, a 50, a 40. Like, excuse me, he's putting up really solid and consistent numbers. Buddy Hield's a very strong play. Bogdanovich, I don't hate him. You know, the one thing about Bogdanovich is, you know, you should get 30-plus minutes from him, and if that's the case, you're not going to complain. Those are the guys there. So a mid-range player in Buddy Hield, you know, below Mitchell, significantly below Beal, and then Jeremy Lamb, Bogdanovich, and Batum offer decent value in that 5K range. But I'm going to have a tough time getting down to anyone that's just dirt cheap, Dan. I don't know if you can get to any of them and feel good about it. I mean, sure, there's Allen Crabbe and such, but
no thanks.
Yeah, you're not trying to go there, and neither am I.
Yeah, and here's the deal. A lot of what Dave and I cover here on the Early Bird is probably cash game leaning. I don't think it's necessarily cash game specific, but guys like Crabbe, yeah, he could go off for 42 DraftKings points. It's possible. I think there's some potential upside there, but we're leaning towards the guys that we can project a little bit more, specifically a little bit more comfortably as we go through and try to understand it all. You get projections over on Awesemo.com. Josh leads the charge there. You get the grades from Alex, and you get the lineup builder as well. And, of course, you get Dave's write-up and then his insight on the multiple shows he is on, including this one. Let's talk small forward next. Paul George still sub 10K. I get it. I get that he's not Russell Westbrook. But if you're talking, and again, this is not DFS specific, if you're voting for the MVP right now, Dave, and you have to choose between Westbrook and George, who are you choosing?
Between Harden and George or Westbrook?
No, Westbrook and George.
If it was an MVP and I had to pick one of them?
Yep.
Easy, Paul George.
Yeah, easy. And listen, that's not DFS specific. I get it. And I'm not trying to make the case that they should coincide, but it feels like Paul George has been disrespected is the wrong word. Underappreciated. That's the right word. Underappreciated when it comes to daily fantasy this year.
I agree. Totally agree.
And here he is at 9,500 again. Yes, Utah, tough matchup. I get it. But it's Paul George, and then it's Buddy Hield or Gallo. So on a site like FanDuel, where you're dealing with an obvious problem at a position like small forward. He's 10-6. That feels like a pretty cheap price point for a guy that you can rely on pretty heavily.
Yeah, the only thing I'd have against that, right? There's only one thing here, is that Paul George was his shooting is concerning me. That's the only thing. So let me give you an example, and I agree. Would you say 9,500?
Yep.
I agree at 9,500. He's still very much in play, even against Utah. That's too cheap. And maybe this is just some regression back to the mean because he had been struggling. But here's the thing. Let's take a look at the 2 games before the injury, okay? Because he missed what, like 3 games or so,
Yep.
or around that. He shot 4 of 19 from the field, 2 for 9 from 3-point range. And then the next game, 7 for 24 from the field, 29% shooting, 3 of 14, from 3-point range, 21%. Then he returns from injury, promptly shoots 8 for 25, 32%, and 4 for 14, 28%. And 7 for 23 the next game at 30%, 1 for 9 from long range, 11%. His last game, 5 for 16, 31%, 3 from 9 from 3, 33%. So that shows me one of two things. Either he's just in a shooting slump,
Right.
or that shoulder was bothering him before he went out for a few games and he isn't fully healed. I don't know what to make of it, but I can say that there is some trepidation there where there wouldn't have been in the event that he came back and even shot moderately well, even shot, at a pedestrian level. But this has been like, even Paul George struggling, it seems crazy to see him go from one extreme just completely to the next extreme and shoot worse than really we've ever seen him all season. That's the only thing I have on it. And it does present some pause, at least, with Paul George.
What else do we have here at small forward?
All right. Oh, and by the way, I'm not sure if you have an answer to this. I hadn't looked into it. I'm going to pull it up real quick now. He only played 28. Oh, he fouled out last game. Okay. Simple enough. I didn't have any Paul George, so I wasn't paying attention. He fouled out. I was going to ask if you knew why he played, 28 minutes, but fouling out. There you go. Makes sense. But still then 9,500, I agree. That's one of those price points where, especially on a night where you don't feel like you have to play Harden or Westbrook, that you can get there a little bit more confidently. Would you rather play Beal or George? Or Andre Drummond against Brooklyn at 9,100?
Well, you spoke my language,
Mm-hmm.
and I would go
Yep.
Drummond first.
Yeah, me too. And you have
Drummond's
Irving too. Irving at 89 against the Clippers. It's a pretty strong spot. I mean, I like that 84 where you have
Yep.
Mitchell up to 97 range more than I like the Westbrook and Harden tier.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you get maybe not 2 for the price of 1, but you get leaning towards 2 for the price of 1 there, where you can get 2 of the stars from that price range you just mentioned, rather than trying to find your way up to Westbrook or Harden on tonight's slate.
Right. Yep. So oh man, that's going to be tough. Those are going to be some tough decisions to make for sure. I'm pretty excited for this slate for a 6-gamer. I like it.
It feels like a fun one. It really does.
It absolutely does. The mid-range at small forward, though, there's nothing that I love here. You talk about guys like Ariza and such, and so Ariza's one of them. Jeff Green's now power forward center eligible, which is pretty funny. We can get to him at power forward, or you can just remember that I mentioned him. Kawhi Leonard against Cleveland, he's getting really cheap, but I do want to throw this to you as well. You have Beal, George, Drummond, Irving, Leonard, Mitchell. You also have Blake Griffin at 8,300 on DraftKings. I'll even throw Kemba in there at 81, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys. Like Kawhi Leonard's at 8,600. Normally you'd be like, wow, that's awesome. Does Kawhi Leonard stand out more than all those other guys, or is he just another name in that group? Or is he someone that you actually like significantly less than most of the other guys, or at least a handful of the other guys in that same tier?
It's
tough question, but he's not been great.
Can
For
I
fantasy
avoid?
purposes, I
Can I
should say.
avoid small forward altogether? Is that an allowed
I
answer
know,
here?
right? I know.
I don't. I honestly, like, from first take, I will be completely honest. I don't have a good answer. I don't like. I really looking the first time before we started recording. It was Paul George or passing over small forward to figure it out later.
All right, fair enough. I mean,
Like,
go ahead.
it was just when I try to do roster construction, I'm trying to find, especially on DraftKings, the position I'm most comfortable at. And then I try to find the value. Those are two things I try to look out for. So I'm trying to find the value early, set those, and then figure out what I can pay up for. But I'm also trying to find, am I most comfortable at point guard, small, wherever it might be. Small forward I avoided when I first clicked
Right.
through. So I'm going to throw my hands up and say, I honestly don't know. I don't have a good opinion here.
That's fair. No, look, and let me try and iron this out a bit, away from Kawhi Leonard, but more so the small forward position. And by the way, on FanDuel, it might be different. You have to. We're pretty DraftKings centric on this specific podcast, but
Yep.
all of our other shows.
Oh, Kawhi on FanDuel, yeah.
Yeah, all of our other shows focus equally on the rest of them. We just try not to take up all of your time in the morning or late night. And if we did discuss both of them
We'd be here for a
equally,
while.
we'd be here for a very long time. We already are. But Kawhi's up to 98 on DraftKings, or on FanDuel. So I don't know. But I'll say this much: if it's a bad position and you don't want to play Kawhi on FanDuel, draft whatever. I honestly think just targeting Sacramento, Washington, you could do a lot worse than that, right?
Yep.
Trevor Ariza is going to get probably 37 minutes. Harrison Barnes, he's not very good, but he's probably going to play 37, 38 minutes. Batum's eligible here on FanDuel. Jabari Parker also in the Washington-Sacramento game. He's at 5,800, 54 on FanDuel. Like him better or 54 on DraftKings, 58 on FanDuel. Like him better on FanDuel because a lot of those guys are over 6K and he isn't. If you get 27 minutes from Jabari Parker against the Kings, a bad rebounding team, I don't have an issue with that. I think it definitely makes sense to say, hey, you know what? I will take some less expensive guys here and play them in the game with a total upwards of or north of 240.
What's your current thoughts on Royce ONeal? Like, how are you handling ONeal at small forward with Rubio out? Is there upside here, or is this just he is what he is, and let's not try to blow him up more than he needs to be?
Who is that? I'm sorry.
Royce ONeal.
You know how I feel about ONeal.
I do.
Look, ONeal absolutely needs 35 plus minutes to just not kill you, to just not ruin your night. And I had a few lineups with him the other day because when you're trying to fit in a bunch of high priced guys, Drummond, Harden, Westbrook, all of them, you're gonna land on some Royce ONeal. But man, if there's ever a great guy to pivot off of when he's chalk, it's Royce ONeal. I said the same thing in the deep dive on awesemo.com. If there's ever a great guy to pivot off of, it's somebody that averages 0.69 fantasy points per minute, and that's when he's not in the starting lineup. Put him in the starting lineup, now he's got to deal with Mitchell for usage, which he's going to see none of, and then he's got to deal with Gobert and Favors for rebounds. I mean, there's nothing there for him. So, if it comes down to it and you say I needed a $3,700, fine. At least he's facing Oakland, right? Or OKC. At least I got Antonio Brown in my head. At least he's facing OKC. But I think a larger concern here is that Royce ONeal only ended up playing 29 minutes last game when he was starting before. He was playing 36, 37. He played 40 minutes last time he got a start prior to this. So if that's a concern, which I think it is, then it's even worse. Yeah, he's just one of those guys. One of those guys that is most likely not going to win things for you.
Right. And again, can be a perfectly fine NBA player. And that's fine. It just may not make it worthwhile in DFS. Let's talk some power forwards. And again, I think Dave's point about the Sacramento game is one worth keeping in mind of when all else fails, if there's a price point that makes sense and somebody in this higher pace game and this higher scoring game, at least consider them. And Bogdanovich and Barnes and guys that you may not think are the best NBA players, maybe in a spot to at least exceed their price point as you go forward. Power forward, you have George, you have Kawhi. Blake Griffin's down to 8,300 and has this matchup with Brooklyn. That is one to consider here for sure. Kevin Love at 7,700. Pascal Siakam at 72. I just love that so much. 7,200. Al Horford is at 6,600 against the Clippers. Gallinari, and we quickly dive into some cheap price points. Harrell's at 6,200. Bobby Portis at 5,900. It's tough sledding at power forward on a 6-game slate, but who do you like the best?
Yeah, power forward has gotten a little bit better recently with the multi-position eligibility. Certainly doesn't hurt. At the top, though, there isn't that much. I mean, you have Kawhi Leonard, who is small forward, power forward eligible now. He's 8,600. Okay, Blake Griffin against Brooklyn. Man, he has been rather underwhelming recently. I mean, big time. I still like him here. This is a spot where I think he can produce really strong numbers, and now you're getting him at a price where it's hard for him to really hurt you. So I do like Blake, and I'd expect him to be a lot less owned than Drummond. I'm not great at predicting ownership, but Drummond's just been so good, and he's got that center matchup against Brooklyn that Blake Griffin may go under the radar a little bit. He's definitely interesting. God, then it kind of falls off a cliff, right? There's not a ton here. I don't with Kawhi back, I'm not really trying to play Siakam. I think he'll have another solid game, 35, 36 fantasy points, but I'm not sure I want to pay upwards of 7,200 for that. Kevin Love's played 31 minutes in back-to-back games. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least interested, because he is such a great per minute player that he's probably going to I'll take Kevin Love at 77 over Siakam at 72.
Yeah.
They're playing each other. One of them obviously has a much more difficult matchup. That is Kevin Love, but I still like him more here for the reasons we talked about. And then who's the Al Horford's power forward eligible. I think it's a pretty decent spot for Horford. A really porous rebounding team in the Clippers. Al Horford hopefully go out, give me 10 rebounds and do his normal thing. 13 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists, and maybe a couple steals and a block or so. That's not terrible, especially if you get the double-double bonus. Bobby Portis, from a minute standpoint, you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. If you look at his last 5 games, Dan, you have 31, 25, 22, 28, 28. If he's less than 6K though, number one. Number two, he's facing the worst rebounding front court or rebounding team in the entire league. To me, Portis stands out as another guy where, like we were talking about a small forward, when in doubt, he's not the worst place to go. If you were to get 30 minutes from Portis in this spot, I think it'd be really, really tough for him not to return very solid value at $5,900.
Makes sense. Price point that hasn't blown out specifically for Portis. Any cheap guys here that can balance out, maybe going after a Drummond or some of the guys, Beal or anywhere else that we've talked about before? Is it ready to move on to center?
Yeah, that's kind of tough.
I mean, Markieff Morris is $3,400. So
your boy, hey, if he still was on Washington and facing the Kings,
exactly right.
Right. Bielitsa's played 30 and 29 minutes over his last 2 games. That's kind of interesting. He's down to being really cheap again. You have no Marvin Bagley. As we know, Harry Giles is strictly backing up Willie Cauley-Stein. So that's certainly favorable. I don't think Bielitsa against Washington, a team that against fours this year has been really, really bad. You could do worse than that for sure. But I don't mind the mid-range when you talk about Bobby Portis, maybe Jabari Parker, certainly not in the same lineup. Only not because they're going to cannibalize each other's production, but
right.
I don't see both of them having great games. You're going to have to probably take a stand on one of them. Then you have your Kevin Loves and Blake's 8,300 on FanDuel. Blake Griffin is 8,300 as well, which is really, really cheap. Those are pretty decent spots to look.
Is there anyone in NBA DFS who has squandered more minutes than PJ Tucker?
You said squandered more minutes? Yep. So done nothing in his minutes?
Exactly right. In NBA DFS, not NBA. Like
guys that act, yeah. It is a
He's
very
playing 40, 38, 36 minutes. Like,
it's a no, it is a really good question. Normally anyone getting that many minutes would be Harrison Barnes hasn't been that far off.
he played 38 minutes in the Dallas game, 94-93 final.
Mm-hmm.
Put up 23.5 DraftKings points.
That's actually a good game for Tucker.
He put up in 40 minutes against Boston, 25.5 DraftKings points.
Yeah. No, it's I bet you could scroll down and find a lot worse ones with a lot bigger minutes than that. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, it's been rough. Here's 34 minutes, 9 fantasy points. I'm actually glad you brought 30 and 14. I'm actually kind of glad you brought this up though, because if you absolutely need to punt, I'll take PJ Tucker over Royce ONeal. I'll take him because you ask, is there anyone that squandered more minutes?
Royce ONeal has.
Yeah, if Royce ONeal had the same role as PJ Tucker, I can assure you that the answer would be Royce ONeal. Even though on the season, PJ Tucker's per minute 0.628. So think about that, 0.628 per minute. Mm-hmm. That's really, really bad, especially when you consider that Royce ONeal on the season is at 0.697. So he's been notably better than PJ Tucker. I think you're right. No one squandered as many minutes as no one's done less with as many minutes as PJ Tucker.
All right, let's close it out by talking some center here, and typically a position of power when it comes to DFS. You do have Drummond at 9,100, and I'll be honest, scrolling through, that's where my initial thought was, well, that's where I'll start building my lineup. You know, we've had plenty of success against the Nets at center in the past. 9,100, not too expensive. Blake is your next most expensive center, same team at 8,300. Gobert, you get Capella here at 7K. Steven Adams is at 6,100 against Rudy Gobert on the other side. And then a ton of the power forward eligible players as well. What are some of your favorite plays here at center, Dave?
All right. Well, Andre Drummond, jeepers creepers. This guy is in a really good spot. How do you overlook him here? You don't. There's no way you can. Andre Drummond, 9,100 is not that crazy on draft at all. He's 10-6 on FanDuel.
Mm-hmm.
There's a marked difference there. He's 10-6, Gobert's 95, Clint Capella's 8K, and Horford's 71. So the reason I say that is, think about this. You have Drummond, then the next closest center drops down 1,100, right? Then the next center from that drops down 1,500 and 2,600 from Drummond. And then the fourth most expensive drops down 900 from Horford and 3,500 from Andre Drummond. So that's a huge drop, right? And then you come down, one or two more, and you're down at 6K. There's no tight grouping here at all. And it's going to force you. Roster construction is going to be interesting at this position because you can't just pivot off one to the other, right? Actually, think about this: how much it'll change the entirety of your lineup if you're rostering Drummond or if you're rostering, Al Horford. They're just so far off, and there's nobody close to any of these guys. So it's going to change the rest of your lineup, whether you want it to or not. I think that's kind of interesting. On DraftKings, it's different. You have Drummond at 91, Griffin at 83, Gobert at 78, Love at 77, Siakam at 72, Capella at 7K, and Horford at 66. So there's a decent drop from a couple to the other, but nothing like that. Absolutely nothing like that. So Drummond is our top dog for sure. In 2 meetings with Brooklyn this season, he has, not surprisingly, been really, really good. He's averaging 1.63 fantasy points per minute in those games, 57 fantasy points in 35 minutes per game. I don't know how you don't like him. We talked about Blake. Clint Capella is interesting because he definitely has mentioned that he'd still been playing, a bit hobbled.
Yep.
He looked good against the Sixers, but not phenomenal. I have no issues with him, but I'm also not in love with him. Again, I'd probably try and get up to like Kevin Love there. Rudy Gobert, here's the interesting one, Dan. 7,800 on DraftKings. So Drummond's 10-6 on DraftKings. 9-1 on DraftKings, 10-6 on FanDuel. $1,500 difference. Gobert is $7,800 on DraftKings, $9,500 on FanDuel. $1,700 difference. what do you think about him against OKC? Because I know that Steven Adams is a stout defender and a great player, but when you're talking about the uptick in pace, you're seeing a huge elevation in opportunities when it comes to peripheral stats, blocks, rebounds, you name it. And Rudy Gobert should be able to bounce back from a rough start against Memphis.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think that people often overlook Gobert and overlook this matchup because of Adams, but the uptick, as you said, in peripheral stats, I think is significant here. And Gobert's not expensive. It's a situation where, listen, I'm starting and ending with Drummond, but from a utility position on DraftKings or pivoting off of Drummond and trying to go with a different construction, Gobert's probably number 2 on the list of where I'm going to go at center.
Right. Yep. No, and the funny thing is, center has a couple really good really good players, but it's not crazy deep. It's not. Could you go to Jared Allen?
That's where I just scrolled to.
Yeah.
You know
right.
me very well.
I know. I do. I know. I suppose you could. He's coming off a strong game, but
4,800.
Yeah. In tournaments, look, Jared Allen's perfectly fine. But rebounding against Drummond won't be fun.
All right, so let me ask you this. We've talked, and I don't know if you have this data in front of you, or I know NBA.com's been moving a lot of the stats around. How are the Houston Rockets against the pick and roll? I ask that because Cody Zeller sits at 5,100, and this is a game that should see plenty of points. I know he's not playing a ton of minutes. I get it. But this seems like the sort of spot where a guy at the center or utility, as we sort of work through this all, could put up a 40-point DraftKings outing with no one even caring. Like, that's the sort of game Zeller plays. I know he has been pointed to as a nice add-on to Kemba Walker's game. When Zeller's in there, the pick and pop and pick and roll play very well. Do you have any data here, or would you stay away from a Zeller on this sort of slate simply because of all the other pieces we have here at center?
Sure. So I'm glad you brought this up. And it's an interesting, you're talking about how are they against pick and roll, roll men though, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
So the New York Knicks are allowing 1.23 points per possession this season. That's worst in the league. The Houston Rockets at 1.21 are second worst in basketball in the pick and roll defense against the roll man. Very interesting. Now, here's the thing. Here's where you have to be careful. People might see that and say, oh man, because points per possession is definitely something that stands out. I mean, it's more important than points.
Right.
But the Houston Rockets are allowing the fewest points to roll men in the pick and roll this year. They're also allowing the lowest frequency by 1 full percent. That's a lot. So the second highest points per possession, so second highest efficiency, and the lowest frequency and second fewest points. So what does that tell you? It tells you a couple of things. One, the way the Houston plays, other teams are, running a lot more transition, fast break against them, or there are easier ways to score on them. Or the biggest thing for me is that now this might sound counterintuitive, but it's also possible that they are actually good at dissuading teams from operating out of the pick and roll, because at this frequency and you're seeing, good efficiency, to me, either it's noisy because it's so fewer attempts than anyone else, or the fact that, they're just very good at preventing you from initiating that. It'd be an interesting thing to look into for sure, but it's strange when you see something like that. Second worst efficiency, or second highest allowed, lowest frequency, second fewest points. You don't see that very often when you're looking at play type data at all.
Do you know anything about bat at the San Antonio Spurs game on Sunday night?
Wait, this happened again?
I don't know. I saw Eric Bledsoe tweeted out, "Mama, I got attacked by a bat."
Oh, that's hilarious. It wasn't, who was it? I forget what team it was, but their mascot caught a bat with a net like a month ago.
All right, so 5 minutes ago, we're recording Sunday night, Eric Bledsoe tweets out, "Mama, I got attacked today." And then the hashtag is the undefeated San Antonio Bats, LOL.
Okay, so this must be a repeat occurrence. Pretty amazing, huh?
Oh, good times. All right. Any final thoughts here at center?
Is there any dirt cheap value?
I don't
Probably
think so.
not. Clint Capella, or sorry, we talked about Jared Allen. So he's on the board. Man, aside from that, unless you see someone, I mentioned Jeff Green earlier.
It seems like the sort of slate where Zubac could have a 30 or 35 point DraftKings outing, and I'd not be surprised. Like it just seems like enough of a matchup with Boston where the rebounds will be there.
Right. And you can always pray that Ed Davis, plays 22 minutes
Right,
and has
exactly.
a big game. You never play him alongside Allen, of course, but I don't think I don't know I want to punt with the center position, and I don't think we'll need to.
That will do it. So you find Dave on Twitter at Lofia_D, LOUGHY_D. We will try to figure out what's the right price point here. We'll go 9K or above because that lets me talk about Andre Drummond. So Drummond, George, Beal, Westbrook, Harden. Again, Drummond, George, Beal, Westbrook, Harden. Where are you starting your lineup construction?
Yeah, man, this is tough. I'm not going to start it with one single guy because I don't think you have to. Drummond, and yes, Bradley Beal is just a fascinating play to me, even though he's very expensive. One of the most friendly matchups on the slate, clearly the highest total. He is very expensive, but with the way he's been playing, I don't think it's an unreasonable price point whatsoever. I really don't. Now, 10-8 on FanDuel, you're getting up there, right? He's expensive. But if you allow me to, I just say this much. Below 9K and above 8K, Donovan Mitchell, I want him. We got to be talking about him, which we did. Kyrie Irving, Blake Griffin at 83. It is really nice from that 8K to $9,700 range. And if you don't think Paul George is hurt, man, 9,500 is also really appealing.
Stay tuned to Awesemo.com for Dave's write-up. Don't forget the NBA Strategy Show comes up around 9:15 Eastern on the YouTubes, as the kids don't call it that, on YouTube. YouTube.com, the Awesemo.com channel. Don't forget, like this video. And if you don't like this video, then just leave it alone. Leave a comment, subscribe, do the same over on iTunes and on any platform you're listening to this podcast on. We appreciate each and every one of you. Early Bird is your promo code, one word, to get 50% off your first month at Awesemo.com. Find me on Twitter at Dan Strafford, Awesemo_com for the mothership. With that said, you get EMAC and you get Adam on Tuesday morning, right here on the DFS Early Bird, presented by Awesemo.com.